Hi everybody. In this short tutorial, I'm going to show you how to model a jack-o'-lantern, and we're going to go from start to finish. So starting with the base file in Blender and ending up with a really simple little scene and a render of our jack-o'-lantern. So first things first, if you don't have Blender yet, go download that. You can find it at blender.org, and I'll have a link in the description that will take you right there. So to start off, I have Blender 3.3 downloaded. You can start a new general file. I already have one set up. It's the same as a general to start off. Also, just for your reference, on the left side of my screen here, you can see what keys I'm pressing. So you can refer to that if I forget to tell you a key or if it helps kind of see what I'm doing. Anyway, so this is the home screen here for Blender. The only objects in the scene are a camera, this basic light, and the default cube. So first things first, let's delete the default cube. You can do that by selecting the cube with the left click and hitting X to delete it. So to start our pumpkin, we're going to start with a sphere. We're going to cut out the planes to make the mouth and the eyes, and then we'll thicken it so that it looks like we had actually cut it out of a real pumpkin and not just a thin plane. And then we'll set up some basic coloring and render it. So the first step here is to add a UV sphere. To do that, hit Shift plus A. It'll bring up this menu, go to Mesh, and add UV sphere. It'll look like this. To move the sphere, hit G, which allows you to move your mouse around to move the object. So hit G, and then I hit Z to lock movement to the Z axis, which is up and down. Okay, so what we need to do is, first of all, we need a little bit more detail to work with than this. So to go into edit mode, at the top left of your screen here, you can see there is a drop down menu, and you can either use that to click edit mode, or you can just hit tab to toggle between object mode and edit mode. So in edit mode, this is what you'll see. Again, at the top left, there are 3 selection modes. There's vertexes, which are these points. Then there's the edges, and then the faces. So what we're going to want to use is the face select tool, but we still need to add some detail. So if you hit A, it'll select everything in the scene that is attached to this object. Since we're in edit mode, we're only able to edit this object here. So hit A to select all, and then you can right click. And the very first option is subdivide. So let's just do that maybe one time. So now you can see we have a lot more planes to work with. And this will give us enough detail so that we can easily remove our cuts for the mouth and the eyes. So in this part, you can be as creative as you want. I'm going to keep mine fairly simple, but select planes by holding Shift and left clicking which planes you want to select. And then you can hit X, and it'll bring up the delete menu, and you can say faces. And you can see that I have deleted this shape out of my sphere. And I'm locking my view to the X axis here. You can use this gizmo at the top right to pick which direction you're looking. It just helps us kind of see what you're doing from one direction. So I'm just going to select the other little eye cut here, hit X, delete faces. So there's my eyes. And then for the mouth, also note you can select and drag. You can click and drag to select more planes at once. You don't have to click them individually. And I'm just going to select a few of these planes. Sure, that looks fine. Again, hit X, delete faces. So this is what we got. Right now it kind of looks more like a smiley face emoji or something, but trust me, we'll get there. So now we've got our cuts made. It's time to go back to object mode. We've got just a couple things we need to do. So in object mode, to get rid of these lines, the easiest way is to right click with the object selected and hit Shade Auto Smooth. If you're in Blender 3.0 and above, I believe, maybe 3.2, I don't remember when they added that, but you can see Shade Auto Smooth and Shade Smooth are very similar at this point, but we'll use Shade Auto Smooth, and that just tells Blender to ignore the lines and smooth the faces between the lines. So with our object smoothed out now and selected, we need to come over to the right side of the screen here to this little wrench icon, which is the Modifiers tab. Click on that, and we're going to add a modifier. Click this drop-down box, and come down here to the Solidify modifier. Go ahead and click that. You can see what it's done is kind of add a little bit of a thickness here. Well, we want more than that. So you can play with the thickness and go either direction you want. It will not affect what we're doing here. So I will probably set my offset to -1 is what it started with. I'll just leave that. Make my thickness something like 0.12 is probably fine. This just helps it look like we had to cut through the pumpkin skin here. So once you've got that done and it's looking okay, we'll apply this, but first, if you right click and you can reshade, if you shade smooth and you shade auto smooth, it'll actually look a bit different. And then shade flat is kind of the original view we had. Well, if you don't like how this looks, we can go back into edit mode and change it a little bit. If you do like where it's at right now with the thickness, you can hit apply on the modifier. So at the very top of the Solidify modifiers menu here, there's this drop down box next to the camera. Bring that down and hit apply. And now that modifier is gone, so this object here is permanently affected by that, so we don't have to worry about settings for that anymore. So now that we've got our thickened little shape here, it still doesn't look anything like a pumpkin. So the next thing we're going to do is use sculpting mode to add some more interest, some more detail to make it look like a pumpkin. So with our object selected, go back up here to your mode drop-down menu and go to scope mode. When you bring that up, you'll have this new menu with all these tools on the left side. For now, we're only going to use a couple, but feel free to use as many as you want. A couple things to know about sculpting tools is how the strength and sizes of the brush work. So right now, the very first one I have is the draw tool. Strength tells Blender how fast to make the brush affect the mesh, basically. So if I put the strength all the way up to 1 and I have the direction set to plus, this will grow out from the mesh. So you can see that's pretty extreme. So if I wanted to do the other way, for instance, just leave it at strength 1 and hit minus. And now you can see it's going in. Control Z to back up, get to where we started. So what we're going to use is just the draw tool, and we want to go, I'm going to use minus, you can use plus if you want to kind of build the thicker parts out. I'm going to cut mine in. So up here, the radius is what changes the size of the brush, and you can change that by just hitting F. Hit the F key and then move your mouse to change the size, and then left click to select. And then the strength is obviously how much it affects it. You can change that by holding Shift and F and selecting the strength you want. left click and that'll set it. And you can see up in the top, those settings had changed. So I'm going to turn my strength down to something like 0.2 and then set my size down a little lower. So for now, we're not going to add any extra topology. There are settings, especially this dynamic topology setting here, that you can use to add detail on the fly. We don't need to do that right now, so we won't worry about it, but feel free to play around with that if you want to see what it does. So the shape of the pumpkin, as we know, is kind of flat on the top and bottom, and then it's got those like kind of bulges that go down the side. So first things first, I'm going to start to cut those kind of little valleys, if you will, out of my mesh. And you can see it's making it move a little bit. If it's too slow, just again Shift F and then left click to select to move the strength up. That's a little easier to work with. And keep in mind you can always Control Z to undo the last action if you didn't like how far it went. So now just using the Sculpt tool, I'm just going to cut out kind of that little valley shape in multiple areas. And if you don't like how kind of jagged it looks, like some of these spots here look a little weird, we'll fix that in just a minute with the Smooth tool. So get your general form for your pumpkin set up first. And how you do this really doesn't matter, just have fun with it. You can change the size of the brush as you go to kind of affect more or less. You can make it easier on you. So here I can do a really wide one and then change my brush size down. Make a little bit thinner piece right in the middle of it. Bring that down. Just make one or two really wide ones that aren't as deep. Something like that. And then let's just finish off with kind of another wide one here. Okay, so now this looks a little rough around the edges. The easiest way to correct this without really doing too much more work is to use the smoothing tool. So if you come down, it's this first orange tool on the left here. Click that. And keep in mind the strength will matter a lot on this tool, so start off with it lower. But think of the smoothing tool as taking the whole area of your brush and almost averaging the height away from the object, if you will. So if you make the brush bigger and you try to smooth, it's going to affect everything, which is not what I want to do right now. So I'll undo that. So a strength down below 0.2 might be where you want to be at. And then you can change your radius as needed. But you can see, as I kind of work my way around these edges, it takes all the sharpness out of the edges. Because since this is a pumpkin, it's organic, it's not going to have the sharp edges as much as a machine would or something like that. So now, to make these cuts on the mouth and eyes not look so blocky, the smooth tool will work. Just be careful with it, because it may or may not get confused with what to do. And we really want to keep some of this, the flat part of the thickness here, so don't go too overboard on the eyes. I just don't want mine to look like it was out of Minecraft or something. If you like that look, obviously feel free to keep it. Smooth that top out just a little more. I think that's looking okay. It might end up looking a little rotten, but we'll see. So then some of these valleys, if you will, are a little too deep. So I think I'll just come in really wide brush with the smooth tool and kind of bring them back out. I'll bring my strength up so you can see what it's doing. But you can see it's just really taking those knobs down. do those a little bit. I don't want to keep that. There we go. All right, I think that looks okay for now. So let's go with that. So when you're happy with your sculpt, the top left, go back to object mode. And you might have some weird shading. And by that I mean these weird lines. Blender just doesn't know how we got from the topology we had to what we have now. And in the top left, or the top right, sorry, you have these different view modes. If you go to the viewport shading mode and click on the wireframe option here, this left one of the four, it'll show you this, and then you can toggle X-ray mode on and off, which just lets you see through. But you want to look for any areas where the mesh looks really weird or you have things overlapping. And this actually looks pretty clean. So if yours looks clean and still has this problem, you might just need to right click and reshade it smooth. So here it is shaded flat. You can kind of see all the faces are spaced out nicely. If I shade auto smooth, I have those kind of sharp artifacts. So I'll show you how we probably need to fix those. If I shade smooth, it looks okay, but I don't like what it did to the edges of my eyes and mouth. So what we can do is go back into edit mode, hit A to select all again, and then hit Shift N, which will recalculate the normals, which are basically just telling Blender which face is up or out. So if your normals are bad, it means that the faces are pointing opposite of each other basically, and Blender has no idea how to shade that. So when you do that, this little menu comes up on the left. If you want to send the normals to point inside, you can, but normally don't. So just hit Shift N and then click on the screen. And most of the time that will fix those weird shading issues. So we'll shade smooth and then go back to shade auto smooth. And it looks like here, it may just be how I have the topology set up. So for now, I'm just going to leave mine shaded smooth, which is just fine. If you have any issues with any of this, especially that sort of thing, feel free to ask in the comments. I like to help people figure this stuff out, so don't be shy. But the only other way to fix this right now with the shade auto smooth is to add more detail, and I don't necessarily want to do it, but let's see what it looks like. So if you go back to edit mode, select all, right click, hit subdivide one more time. It may or may not be enough to fix that, and we might actually have overlapping vertices here. So I'm going to go back into the vertex select mode and grab one of these where you can see the shading switches abruptly, and it looks like those are okay. So it must just be changing the slope too fast. So I'm actually gonna go back into sculpting mode and hit this with the smooth tool again. And if it looks weird in sculpt mode, it's probably going to look weird in normal shading. So anywhere you have really weird bumpiness or really sharp angles, you might want to come in and hit it with the smoother again. Like here you can kind of see some of the maybe banding, kind of the circles that go around. The smooth tool will help get rid of those, so you can run it on a very low strength and get rid of some of that. Yeah, that should help a lot. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Go back to object mode, shade auto smooth, and it looks like we fixed it. These steps probably seem like they're a little extra, but they're very important once we start to add materials, because the materials will not hide that for us. They won't just look better if the topology is bad. So So now you've probably got something like this. Let's go ahead and add a stem on top real fast. So to do that, hit Shift A again, mesh. I'm going to start off with a cylinder, and it's going to be too big, so scale it down with S, and then move your mouse to pick the size. And then I'm going to hit G and then Z to move this up a little. Yeah, that's a good starting point. So then with the stem selected, I'm going to go to edit mode and leave everything selected, right click and subdivide maybe 2 times so we get more detail to work with. And then I'm going to go to sculpt mode. And you can draw just like we did before, or you can use this grab tool here, which is what I'm going to do. Make it nice and big, and just kind of pull this around to make it look better. And if you want it to be very basic shapes, feel free to leave it just as a cylinder or any other shape if you want to. But I think that will be a little bit more fun. So let's go back to object mode and then right click and shade auto smooth again. And it looks like it's going to look just a little weird. So we might have to hit it with the smooth tool. So I'll go back to sculpt, hit it with smooth, and here be careful with the smooth tool because it might go overboard on you. Especially since the top plane there didn't have extra topology, so the shading might get real weird. So we've got a little bit more banding, but that's not going to matter on the stem as much because it's going to kind of have some texture eventually anyway. Let's get that in there. Okay, so now we've got our pumpkin and our stem. We're going to need to add materials and then add a little bit of a scene. So I'm going to move this all down so that it's close to the origin, which is where all of the axes meet here. And then let's start to add materials. So select your pumpkin and then come to the material properties options on the right side over here. It's the second to last option. So click that, and with your pumpkin selected, hit new right here. And then if you double click on this name here, you can change the name of the material, which is nice to help keep them separated so you're not using the same ones for other parts. So if you left click, that name will save. And then you can start to play with these settings. And I'll change just a few. For now, let's just do the base color. But you definitely want to play around with these settings to see what they do. So we're going to select an orange color. And you can see nothing happened. Well, it's because we're still just in the solid mode. We need to switch to the viewport shading mode. So let's do that. And now you can see we have some kind of quick shading. It's not realistic, but we can see our colors. So that's actually looking really good right now. So now let's select the stem, add another material for that. We'll call that stem. Left click, and then we can change our color. I'm going to start with an orange and then make it dark. Let's make it just kind of a brown. That looks all right. So now, in order to see what the materials will end up looking like, we're going to have to switch into rendered mode. So depending on if your computer can handle it, you're gonna have to play with your settings a little bit. But with nothing selected, we're in object mode. At the top of the screen on the right side, go to the render preview mode and click that. And you can see some of the shadows look a little more realistic now, but nothing really changed. Well, we're still in the preset renderer is Eevee, which is a fast, kind of more toony render engine. Sometimes it's not always toony, but what we want to use is cycles. So switch to that. And you can use your CPU or you can use your GPU. If you can, try the GPU. It's going to be way faster. If it's not supported but your CPU still works, then feel free to do that too. It's not going to make any difference. It'll all work. I am going to turn on viewport denoising. So the very first setting down here is the sampling. This is just going to help us see what it looks like in the viewport. And I'm going to change my denoiser to open image denoise. I can also use optics because I have an NVIDIA GPU, but you really don't necessarily need it. So if you can't run them, don't worry about it. Otherwise, you can pick depending on what your hardware is. So I'll use open image denoise, and I'll leave all the settings alone. And you can see it takes just a second for this to load, and then the shadows start to get a bit more realistic. You can see some of the glossiness on the pumpkin. And keep in mind we haven't really changed any of the material settings, so we can see what it'll look like better before we change our materials much. Let's add our little scene. So what we're going to do is add a plane, and if a little side note, if running this in the rendered view is too hard on your computer, feel free to switch back to either one of either the preview mode, material preview mode here, or the solid view mode. Doesn't really matter. Then obviously this is way easier to run because you're not doing any math for shadows or lighting. But hit Shift A, whoops, Shift A, go to Mesh and add a plane. That'll automatically go down to the origin. We just want to scale that with S, and then move your mouse out to scale it up. And our camera is going to be something like this at a little bit of an angle, a little bit above the pumpkin. So I would move the plane. So let's hit G and then Y, and you can see it's locked to sliding on Y. Let's move it to the right a little, and then hit G and X to move it backward a little. Somewhere in there. Maybe move it back in on Y. That might be good. So let's get our camera set up first because we want to know where our background has to be at. So if you come up here and you see this little camera icon, if you click that, it'll show you where the camera is right now. Well, you can't really move it yet, so there's a setting we have to turn on. You can manually move this just like you would move anything else. So you can hit G and X to slide it or whatever. I think that's unnecessary for what we're doing. So what we're going to do is come find this little arrow by the 3D gizmo here. Either click on this or you can hit N on the keyboard. That'll toggle this on and off. And then go to the View tab here. And then I click on the camera to view. So now when we click into the camera view, we'll get this screen, but whatever way we move, the camera comes with. So now we can get our scene set up and we kind of know where our camera is supposed to be at. So we know what parts of it to modify. Let's see, so let's maybe do something like that. And then I'm going to scale my plane again just so that all of the corners of my camera are filled up. And then I'm going to leave the camera view mode, so click on the camera icon again and you will leave it. So now we can navigate again and our camera stays put. So what we want to do is we want to bring the back of this plane upward so that we don't just have empty space behind the pumpkin. So with the plane selected, go into edit mode. I just use tab, and then we'll subdivide it a couple times. So right click, subdivide, right click, subdivide. Go as many times as you think you need to. I'm going to go maybe 4. I think this is enough detail. So basically what we're going to do is build a backdrop. So now we're still in edit mode. Select the vertices on the back of the plane here, like that. And then we can hit G to move all of these, and then lock it to Z. So we don't really want to do this for 3 or 4 different lines of vertices. It takes more time. So with these selected, we can use the proportional editing button. So it's right here in the middle of the screen. You can click it on, and there's a lot of settings under here, but just use smooth for now. And then come back down, hit G again, and then Z, and you can see the little circle on the screen shows you how far away from what is selected the tool will affect. So if you want to affect more vertices, you can scroll down on your mouse wheel to grab more of these to bring them with. And there's nothing too important about how you do this. I would say try to make it smooth so you don't have, any weird shading going on with the plane, because we don't want a real harsh angle here because it'll show up when we render. We just kind of want it to fade into a background for us. So when you think it looks okay, you don't even have to leave edit mode, just go back into the camera view. And we want to make sure that our entire background is in the camera view. So I have this little triangle exposed. So I'm going to go back into object mode, since I have a lot of extra background on the left side here. With my little background plane here selected, I'm going to hit G and Y to slide this until my camera view is covered by that. So now I have no spots where there's just an emptiness, because if you have no background there, you'll just see basically nothing, or whatever your default viewport color is. So we don't want that. So now you can see there's some harsh lines here on the background. Well, right click and just hit shade smooth, and that'll take care of those. Yeah, shade smooth is the best for that. If it still shows up or doesn't look right, you could go back into edit mode and try to move the vertices so that it's less harsh of an angle. But I think this looks okay for now. So I'm not moving my viewport now because I am in camera mode and I want to leave it here. But I'm going to go to the render preview, and you can see the shadow of the pumpkin now falls on the plane. And I don't want to use a white plane. You can use whatever color you want, but come back into the material properties over here, click new. I'm going to call this ground, and then I'm going to change the color, maybe to just a gray. Yeah, maybe even black, because it's going to look really cool with how we set up our lights. So I'm going to make it black, and then in the settings down here, I'm going to turn the roughness down quite a bit, maybe at around 0.2. And then just play with some of the settings till you think it looks cool. It'll just take a while to learn what all the different settings do. But for now, I just want to see a little bit of a reflection of the pumpkin. Set it up however you want to, though, for your scene. And then for each one of these objects, for the stem and the pumpkin, then you can change settings. So the biggest ones to use right off the bat are roughness, which makes this go from like a glossy smooth like that to where there's you can still see kind of these white reflections on the pumpkin, but they're nice and spread out now. And then all the way rough, this doesn't reflect any light back, so it just looks kind of like a matte color. So I'm going to put mine down to say 0.3, 0.4, somewhere in there. And then specular is another setting that tells Blender how the light should bounce off of it. That's a fun one to play with. I'm actually going to move mine up a little from where it starts at 0.5. And then anisotropic changes a little bit more about the shape of reflections. And again, just play with it. There's no right or wrong answer to this. Just make it look cool. And that looks pretty good for now. For the stem, I'm just going to give it a little more roughness. Not really going to get too crazy on that for now because it doesn't really have enough detail to worry about it. So that looks all right. Now, really the only other thing we absolutely need is to have good lighting. So I'm going to leave my camera view since I don't want to move that. So now I'm back just in the viewport. We do have one light already in the scene, and it is this point light. So if you click on the light either in the viewport here or up in the scene collection in the list up here, and then come down to the object data properties over here on the right side, it looks like a light bulb. You can change what type of light this is. And for this one, I'm going to use an area light. And then I'm going to move this with GY, move it away from the pumpkin a little bit, and then GX. And the line here that comes out of the light is showing you where the light is pointing. And then I'm going to hit R for rotate, and then Z, so we rotate around the vertical axis. And select. So now you can kind of see the light is pointing down at the ground in front of the pumpkin. Now I'm going to hit R to rotate, and then X. So we get a little bit of a side lighting on the pumpkin. And we don't want 1,000 watts. Let's try something like 150. And the power, the wattage is how bright the light is. So in your scene, you want to have an area light like this set up kind of to the side. It'll change how the shading looks a lot and kind of make the shadows more interesting. So I'm going to go with something like that. You can change the color of the light. So I'm actually going to make mine kind of a blue because I think that'll look spooky. And that's already looking pretty interesting. But we're going to add one more light. So come back over toward your pumpkin, Shift A, and then we're going to add a light. So come down here to light, and we're going to use a point light here. You can see mine started in the pumpkin, yours might not have. With that new light selected, hit G to move, and then Z to move vertical. And you just want to place this light where you think the candle would be inside of the jack-o'-lantern. I'm not going to build the candle in this video, but that's another fun little thing you could add. So now for this, I'll go back to my camera view. I think I want that to be a little brighter. So play with the wattage a little. Something like 20, I think, looks pretty good. And then I'm going to move my light around a little more. And what I'm watching here is the reflection on the ground. Just trying to see if I can get it to look more interesting. So if you put it too low, the mouth of the pumpkin blocks it. If you put it too high, it comes out, or you can't really see much from it. So it's going to kind of put it in the middle. And then it creates some of this kind of fun bright edge lighting on the eyes here. So I'm going to leave that where it is. I think that looks all right. One other important setting with these, though, is to change the radius. You should think of that as basically how big is the light for a point light. So if I make this really small, you can see it looks like a little candle flame. And then if I play with the brightness, you can tell it really cranks it up. If I bring it down, it's almost nothing. So I'm going to leave mine at the 20 watts, but make it a pretty small radius. Mine's 0.04. I think that looks okay. I think my area light needs a little bit of power, so I'm going to click on that. Maybe bring that up and see what happens. And it kind of looks like my blue is too dark, so it's not casting any shadows behind the pumpkin and really not much on the ground. So I'm going to bring this a little bit closer to white, just a little bit of a blue hue to it. And then I'm going to bump up the power on my area light here, because I do want a little bit of a shadow there. The other thing you can do with an area light is change the size of it. So the bigger the area light, the more soft the light is, meaning it spreads out more, so it'll look more like it's coming from the moon if you make the light bigger. So I think that's getting closer, and then I'm going to come back and tweak my ground again. Oh, because I do want to show a little bit of the shadow from the pumpkin. And here I'm just playing with settings. There's nothing magical about what I'm doing. So just try it till it looks cool, basically. Okay, so now you might be saying, well, this is all fine and good, but is that what it's actually going to look like? And the answer is no. So to see what it will actually look like, we need to set up a couple things, but come over here to this camera. Make sure you're in cycles, which is what we want to render with. You don't have to use cycles, but this tutorial covers cycles more, so we'll stick with that if you can. And then come down below here, one down to the output properties. I'm going to use a resolution of 2560 by 1440p, which is my monitor. You can make that whatever you want. The image that it creates will just be that size. It doesn't matter what your screen is. So I could make this, 100,000 and 80,000, but it's just going to be a massive file that nobody's screen can show anyway. So make the resolution whatever you want. The only other thing you really have to do in here is change where the file is going to go. The default is to your system temporary files, and that is not what you want to do. So use this little browser here and just select a location to save your renders to. So now you can see this is going to go to my pumpkin tutorial file. All right. So the frame range and all that stuff, don't worry about for now. That's just for if you're animating. We're just going to take one still shot. So with all that set up, you should be good to go to render. So you can, at this point, either hit F12, which will start the render, or you can come up to the very top left of your screen here, hit the render button, and hit render image. And you can see here the hotkey is F12. First thing, though, I'm going to save because I haven't in a while. Also, when you're using Blender, don't forget to save all the time. It does happen to crash, especially if you accidentally set a setting too big or out of range. It'll crash it, so save a lot. But I think we're ready to render, so let's see how this looks. I'm going to hit F12, and you can see it running the samples up at the top of my screen. One thing to note with all these realistic lights and everything is it is probably going to take a while to render if you don't have high-end hardware. I have two RTX 3090 GPUs in this machine, so my renders will be very fast. Yours may not be that fast, but this one, it should be simple enough. It shouldn't take more than a minute. And here you can see some of my lighting. My render got done. Some of the lighting looks a little blocky, just a little bit of hard lines, but it's kind of cool to see the shadows and the blue light reflecting on here. So I think for now this is looking pretty cool. There's a lot more tweaks we can make with materials, and we'll probably do that in future videos, but we can add surface displacement to this to make it look more realistic and more bumpy. But for now, I think this is looking pretty cool. Once you have your rendered image on your screen, it is not automatically saved anywhere. So you have to go to the top left here, go to Image, and then hit Save As. It'll bring up the menu asking where to save it. Give it a name. Just call mine Pumpkin Render, and then Save As. So now it'll be in the folder you tell it to go to, and you can exit the render screen here and get back to the viewport. Future steps here would be to maybe move your camera around, maybe add some other objects, change how the ground looks. This just gives you a basic idea of how to use Blender to set up an object, set up some lights, and hopefully this is helpful to kind of see the scope of an entire project. I'll have more of these coming for October because I like the Halloween stuff. I think it's a lot of fun. So I'll do more advanced tutorials here soon, including a werewolf character I think would be a good one. So watch for those. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I love to help people. It's one of the biggest parts of this to me. So don't be shy about that. And let me know what you're thinking. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching.